the moment that things are actually pretty far into getting better tends to be the moment people want to give up the most. And the reason for that is if you just think about like a curve of like, I'm so excited, everything's bad. Okay, now things are getting better. The point where things are getting better is very close to the low point on that curve. Like from a just pure like distance, you're only just a little bit above the low point. So you're still in a terrible place. And it's actually been a longer time since you were excited than the low point. The low point, you can still remember when you were excited. When things start to get better, it's been even longer. And that was what was happening to us in 2017.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fintech Leaders, coming to you from New York City. I'm your host, Miguel Armaza, and I'm a co-founder of Gilgamesh Ventures, a venture capital fund that backs early-stage fintech entrepreneurs in the US, Canada, and Latin America. If you enjoyed this conversation, I invite you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows so more people can learn about fintech leaders. In this episode, I sit down with Tommy Nicholas, CEO, co-founder at Alloy, a company that gives fintechs and banks a command center to control their fraud fighting, credit, compliance risk, and identity decisioning needs. Founded in 2015, Alloy has raised around $200 million from Bessemer, Avenir, Clocktower, Flourish, Lightspeed, primary Techstars, and a long list of great investors. In this episode, I stopped by the Alloy New York City office where we discussed the early days of Alloy and how they overcame several tough years and finally hit their stride. A deep dive of the complex world of anti-fraud and how Alloy aggregates multiple solutions into their platform. Several company building lessons in the context of a tough raising environment. And a reminder from Tommy to tech founders that it's okay to raise a down round or give the money back. Hope you enjoyed this great episode. Well, thanks for opening your doors to where the Alloy magic happens here.
Yes.
How are you doing today, Tommy?
I'm great. It's a beautiful, beautiful day in New York City, as you can see.
Yeah.
I'm having a great day.
I mean, you're a powerful man. Can you make something about the weather staying the same? Can Alloy pull that off?
I'm not that powerful, and then I'm even more not that powerful to change New York City weather. If I could change one thing, I would just get rid of the clouds in winter. I'll take the temperature of the clouds.
All right, we need that sun. So, Tommy, I have been following Alloy for many years, and I feel that I'm close to the company, especially through Laura and many other people. I admire what you guys do, and so think we're going to get a very good education about the story of Alloy, about what you've learned along the way, and also some maybe predictions or some things to come for the future. But let's get started at the very beginning. What led you to Alloy?
Yeah, so I mean, I have to start with the obligatory like elevator pitch for Alloy before I explain what we do, because I am told by my team all the time, you can never be selling too much. So Alloy solves risk problems for financial services companies, in particular banks and fintechs. We solve three types of problems: fraud problems, compliance problems, and credit problems, and specifically the decision-making around those topics: stopping fraud, staying compliant, making credit decisions when you originate accounts and after you originate accounts. Everything from loans to credit cards to checking accounts to brokerage accounts, etc. But the way we got passionate about that topic was actually Laura, you referenced earlier, my co-founder. Are there two co-founders, Charles, and we have a secret fourth co-founder, Scott, who prefers not to have the founder title, but
shall not be mentioned.
Yes, should not be mentioned, but he's still here with us and is a big part of the founding story. We were all working in payments, specifically ACH payments, building money movement flows primarily for financial services companies. And it's as simple as we realized that even though we were building payments infrastructure, we felt like we were spending all of our time solving the problem of verifying users, making sure we weren't doing business with synthetic identities, just demonstrating compliance to our ODFI and banking partners, underwriting credit. And in this particular instance, it was basically floating funds to people to be available immediately. And we were like, we spend no time building payment flows. We spend no time building like returns technology. We spend no time dealing with anything that feels like it's payments. We spend all of our time building about risk, things about risk, specifically fraud, compliance, and credit risk. And so we all got super passionate about, starting a company in that space. And then everything from like that insight to actually becoming a company that was doing that and like providing that service to companies and, had money to pay its bills was a super winding road. But that insight has really stuck with us from the, sometime in 2014 all the way through now.
Where did that insight come from? And I'll tell you, this is a topic that has come up a few times in the podcast. And specifically, you familiar with Jimmy Sonny? He is the author of the most recent PayPal book.
Oh, cool.
And extensive interviews with Max Levchin, Elon Musk, all those guys. And Levchin was like, building a payments company is not that hard. It's software. The hard part is controlling for risk and fraud, right? So this is an insight that, and then they had to fix for it, right? In the late 90s, early 2000s. Where did your insight specifically for this come from?
Yeah, so specifically what we were doing was building ACH payments that could be made available instantly. So you could, for example, sign up for like a cryptocurrency wallet. It was back in 2014, a cryptocurrency wallet. You could link a bank account, a US bank account, and you could say deposit $3,000 and it could be made available immediately. And that required us effectively to be able to do a whole bunch of things around account linking, which would look like modern account linking platforms like Plaid or MX or whoever, right? Like we had to do that. That was part of the business. We had to be able to move money, which meant we had to be like, working with banks and ODFIs and doing money transmitter stuff. And then we had to, and this was a surprise to me when I got involved with the company, we had to make sure the users weren't going to charge back their payments. We had to make sure they weren't money launderers. And we had to do a bunch of stuff around whether we wanted to issue a real-time credit or not. That I was familiar with that we were going to have to do. But the fact that, the second you put a financial services product on the internet, people will try to use it to commit fraud using stolen identities, fake identities, synthetic identities, hybrids therein. Money launderers will try to use it to, either get around sanctions or to layer money or to clean money. And demonstrating compliance that you're not facilitating that, even if you're not, demonstrating that compliance is existential to being in business or out of business. That was all we talked about every day. All day, every single day. What are the fraud losses today? What are the credit losses today? What's going on with our ODFIs and our banking partners, and how do they feel about money laundering compliance? Who's reviewed the cases? Did we file the SAR? Did we file the CTR? Like, that was all the time we spent. And after you do that for 6 months, you go, God damn, like, why is this so much work? And not just so much work because there's a lot of time and attention that needs to be put onto it, which is fine. I think, like, especially as I've been in financial services for a long time, the fact that we were spending a lot of our time and attention on it, fine, probably good, because financial services is a risk management business after all. But the fact that the technologies to facilitate those things felt like they almost basically didn't exist was shocking. Going back, I know now that the reason was, no matter how big I thought financial technology was, or, let's say purely digital financial services built on the internet, no matter how big that felt to me in 2014, it was not that big. 5% of accounts, I believe at the time, were originated online. Very few banks had true real-time account opening. The idea that you could apply for a credit card online definitely existed, but the processing therein was not digital. People were still applying for credit cards mostly at like the college job fair, where they would kind of come around, or on airplanes, or, maybe 4 or 5 very scaled players doing it online, but even they were super risk averse for all those online applications like Amex, et cetera. So, at the time I thought, this is crazy. All financial services is digital. Financial services is a risk business. why is the technology that powers fraud risk, compliance risk, and credit risk so bad? The answer is no, Tommy, you're just like 23 and you don't realize that financial services is all not digital. It's digitizing, but it's not digital, yada, yada, yada. I mean, that was the root cause.
And I was just reading QED's latest report. I think it's called The State of Fintech or something like that. Fintech is still only 2% of the market cap of the industry. So it's only going to continue. So we're not talking about many things, but since we're talking about fraud, that is also a segment of the industry that evolves. And, you know, the fraudsters are very well organized and they run things like a business. What are some of the most prevalent types of fraud that you're seeing today? How is that side of the industry evolved?
One of the things, so one of the things that's been so interesting, and so again, like, because Alloy is fundamentally decision-making software for automating, making a decision about somebody, whether they're fraudulent or not, making a decision about whether somebody's a money launderer, or making a decision about whether somebody's a credit risk or not. We have a very wide application in a very narrow area. So when folks go, I'm going to answer the actual question, but just as a background for why I know this answer, when people actually go and facilitate the end-to-end decision-making process, inclusive of even if people go look at an application to do some sort of manual review, which we hope they don't have to do, but even if they do, Alloy facilitates that entire process from ingesting the external data, building the decision-making flows, building the steps the user goes through, providing case management around that, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that we are really dialed in on is exactly what are businesses, banks, fintechs, companies that you may describe some other way, but provide financial services, money transmitters, et cetera. What are they actually doing end to end today to stop fraud and say yes to good users and stop fraud? And is it working? We have like a really tight understanding of that because we see the entirety of the process, not just a part of the process. So what's been really interesting to me is when we, let's say, you know, we skipped some of the like between the idea and getting the company going. Suffice it to say, that was hard. But like by the time we were in like, let's call it 2019, and we were doing this at scale for some of the larger, you know, financial services companies, banks, et cetera, even all the way back then, which wasn't that long ago, the main threat that people were mitigating was folks, especially when it comes to originating new accounts, was folks basically stealing identities from, you know, going on the dark web and buying identities that were breached during the Equifax breach or the Verizon breach or whatever, just taking the name, address, email, social security number, et cetera, of a known person, going on a website, filling in those details and getting bank accounts and then committing fraud in those people's names, which might be, you know, racking up a bunch of charges on a credit card and not paying it back. That's a very easy way to commit fraud. It might be spending a bunch of money, you know, depositing money from an account that doesn't belong to you, spending it, and then, you know, that money will eventually get charged back, and then the bank's on the hook. A bunch of different things, but like really simple stuff of just stealing people's identities a really simple way, and then using them to commit fraud. And the funny thing was the way to prevent that fraud was basically to just get not just smarter than those fraudsters are, but just a little bit smarter than your peers. And I call this like the slowest like deer problem or slowest gazelle problem. It's like, imagine a predator's chasing after something, and you don't have to be the second, you don't have to be the fastest gazelle. You just need to be the second slowest because they just need to catch one. And the techniques that people largely implemented to stop that kind of fraud was using machine learning models provided by third parties or internal parties to basically figure out the characteristics that look like a stolen identity instead of a, you know, not stolen identity. An example might be, are they using an email address that was auto-generated in the last 90 days because they're trying to make an email address that looks like the stolen identity they're using, but they actually control simple stuff like that. Those were like pretty groundbreaking. And most of the companies we saw that implemented even basic strategies around using better data and, you know, machine learning generated scores, regardless of the quality, basically got to a fairly stable point pretty quickly in the 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 era. And the main debate was like, how many data sources should you use? Which ones should you use? In what order? How do you manage exceptions? A lot of things that we made really easy for people, speeding up the adoption of these strategies. But, you know, they were not I didn't feel like they were groundbreaking things. What's changed is that fraud has gotten bolder and fraud has gotten weirder over the intervening 4 years. Like it has gotten way bolder and way weirder. I would say the weirdest, I think the best example of weird that I'll give you is social media plays a huge role in scams and various other kinds of fraud now, where we'll find our clients, they'll either tell us or we will find that there's little pockets of like WhatsApp or Weibo or Twitter or Facebook where people are saying, hey, Neobank X is doing a giveaway of money. Here's how you get it. And they just outline committing fraud, but like it's packaged as, a giveaway. And then there's sort of plausible I think the people who follow that, they know, but there's plausible deniability. And, there's various ways it benefits the people who are writing these playbooks. That's weird. And you'll see these bursts of fraud that you're like, where did this come from? And you're like, oh, it's this social media thing. That's crazy. So that's there's a million versions of this. I can go do. That's one way it's gotten weirder. It's gotten bolder, and this is a scarier thing, but it's gotten bolder in the sense that there are things that we used to, I've been speaking to fraud leaders over the last year about this, like there are things that we used to think wouldn't happen. So for example, if somebody's committing fraud in a digital channel, you assume that they're not going to then go exit the fraud in a physical channel, meaning like walking into an Apple store with the stolen card they got and buying stuff and walking, because now they're on camera.
Right.
Now they're in person. Now the whole thing's revealed itself. And for some reason, I can speculate, but for various reasons, some of which I know, some of which I don't, I guess would be a better way to say it, is there's way more like walking into Apple stores and walking out with computers. Some of that goes back to actually what I just talked about with the social media, which is some of the people who are involved are being manipulated. And so they can be manipulated into doing anything.
Yeah.
Hey, go sign up for this neobank and now go walk into this Apple store and tell them you're buying computers for this company called Alloy because they couldn't get computers shipped for their new employees in time. And these people think that this is actually all a real legitimate thing that's happening. And then they ship them off and they're shipping them off to the fraudster who supplied them with stolen funds. And now they're the ones holding the bag. That's part of it, people being manipulated. But I believe another part of it is simply some fraudsters, they're just being bolder.
Yeah.
And it's become a more professionalized. The dollars are bigger. The pressure on them is higher. Their organizations are bigger. And so it's got weirder and it's gotten bolder.
How about combating it? Have you seen any moonshot ideas that have been proposed or that you would like to see to keep combating fraud?
Well, so I have a somewhat controversial take on this to some extent, which is that the fraud that we see take place in the United States, because this is going to be a little controversial, I'll keep it broad, because the fraud that we see in the United States is very different than the fraud that we see in the UK, just in the UK, for example. I can say with confidence that some of the reason that we have so much fraud, in particular financial fraud in the United States, is government driven. The government and other policymakers driven. The rules, regulations, system, law enforcement in the United States facilitate openings that are not facilitated in other countries. I'll give just a very, very simple example that I actually don't even think is that important, but like it's less controversial, so I'll use it. We didn't get chip and pin and tap and pin and all the various things that secure cards in the US until like very recently. They had those in Europe for a long time.
Everywhere.
Those are fraud prevention tools. Okay, without getting into some of the more controversial ones, there's lots of things like that. All right, there's lots of rules, regulations, expectations, cultural norms, other regulatory or non-regulatory, Visa, MasterCard, et cetera, rules that are just different in other parts of the world than they are in the United States. So here's a moonshot idea. Like we kind of know how to stop a lot of fraud. It's by doing the things that happen in low fraud countries, in financial services countries that have less fraud. That would be one. Of course, I think there's aspects of digital identity verification, the data that the governments make available about who's even a real person in the first place and how would you verify them? Government could play some role in that. Other ecosystem players like the networks, et cetera, could play a role in that. Yada, yada, yada. But I think I tend to think of these things, I tend to think folks think of these things as more like rocket science than they actually are. I think they're all generally fairly tractable problems. Now, I'll say a positive though here, which is that part of the reason that there's a lot of fraud in the United States is because there's a really, really strong consumer protection. And consumer protection and the facilitation of fraud, they do have a interplay together, which is healthy to some extent. For example, chargebacks are a huge way that people commit fraud in the United States, either as in somebody else's name or even in their own name. Oh, I didn't make that purchase. That might be because you really didn't, because somebody stole your stuff, which is fraud by the other person, but not by you. Or it might be that you actually are committing fraud. It's nice that we have really kind of no questions asked consumer protection around some of that stuff. And you're seeing in the areas that actually have, like more push payment type regulations like Zelle, et cetera, in the United States that, well, they have fraud, but it's not the type of fraud or the scale of fraud that can happen with like third-party identity theft type things. But there are a lot of people getting tricked into sending money on Zelle, to fraudsters, and they have no consumer protections on that. That sucks too. So I completely acknowledge there's like a huge push and pull here, but I do like to kind of come back to this like, well, do we need moonshot ideas, or do we just kind of need to look around the world and say like, what is a system that facilitates less fraud and implement it? I'm sure it's a little bit of both.
And there's also, it's surprising to me how wide the software stack is for anti-fraud tools. I was talking to the head of anti-fraud, and I won't say the name of the company, but it's pick your favorite B2B neobank.
Okay.
Right? And they were telling me just like the list of companies and providers that they use to combat and analyze the data from different angles. And it was a long list.
It's extensive. And so whoever that is they're at the deepest forefront of fraud risk. And I'll tell the reason is you have a business. Business could be real. Business could be fake. That's a huge important thing. Business could be fraudulent, real but fraudulent. A lot going on there. The business has owners. That's relevant, but it also has operators. Who's actually operating? That matters. So you could have legitimate business with legitimate owners, with legitimate operators, and then one bad operator. Now you've got fraud.
Yeah.
Lots of problems there to solve. Then you've got the fact that what are the expectations for businesses around business banking? Sending huge amounts of money on time. There's times where payroll is the main example, but there's times where if the money doesn't go out at the expectation of a business, like the officers can be subject to like going to jail. If you don't make a payroll you promise to make, and you don't then file bankruptcy effectively, it's like a really risky thing for the owners and operators of businesses. And then think about accounts payable and money you owed for various, like it's a big deal to be able to send out a $50,000 wire with no questions asked, because you just have to be able to do that. So, I love the business banking use cases because they tend to just be, there's like zero tolerance for fraud and highly complex operations and extremely high expectations of the people who operate the companies that use those products. And I think talking to those folks really will show you how wide the stack is. You have the data sources I mentioned that are more like, take the data we have, provide analytics back, scores, whatever. You have biometrics. How do people behave? How do they look? What can they touch? What can they answer? You have step-up authentication. How can I get the person to do a thing that I didn't originally ask them? You have you just have this broad set of things, and orchestrating them all together in the right order over time as things change, as new providers become available, as new strategies need to change, as fraud evolves, as expectations evolve, as regulatory environment evolves, is a constant source of pain for these founders and these operators. That's what I experienced. And I was like, holy shit, I really feel like the root problem here is needing a system that can evolve. We call it future proofing, and that is makes available all the best of the entire ecosystem and isn't hard coded into one set of opinions or one set of vendor choices. And that's what we do at Alloy. You knew I had to bring that back to Alloy.
Absolutely.
Can't help.
That has to be the last word of every answer.
And that's why Alloy should be your partner of choice.
So, Tommy, this is all super interesting. We haven't talked too much about the early days of Alloy, and I've heard you speak before, and you're very candid and open about particularly the years that were tough. And I think you describe it as wandering around the desert, right? Take us to those days.
Yeah. So when we started the company in 2015, we were, young group of technical founders, and my co-founder Laura, who had a really good reputation in the fintech market, and so I'm exempting her from this next statement. But the other three, and we had a fifth engineer, Peter, who was a big part of our founding story too. The other four of us, who are these guys? Nobody knew us. We really had no material credentials. We had worked on some really interesting payments things. I think we could hang our hat on our knowledge and our mastery of the topic area if you wanted to get into it with us. But we didn't have resumes to speak of, et cetera. Okay, so we're early 20s people with no resumes to speak of and no background and no money. And oh, by the way, here's our pitch. Trust us with the thing that is completely existential and in fact regulatorily required. So therefore it's there's law. You could go to jail if you do this poorly. Maybe second worst, you'll go out of business. We want you to trust us not with a part of that stack, but the entire stack. Because we are a stack provider. We are the operating system that runs decision-making across fraud, compliance, and credit. We're not providing a new credit score. We're not providing a new fraud score. We provide the literal infrastructure that powers this stuff and makes it great. Tough pitch, man. Hey, you don't know me. I've got no background. I've got no money. And I want you to outsource the technology portion of the most important thing you do.
Did you grow your beard to look older?
I did. I did the opposite. I dressed like shit and looked exactly as young as I was. And I relied heavily on Laura. And the reality is, and if I look back, I'm how did we get out of that period? It was really two things, but they took a very long time. The first was we did spend a lot of time getting to know the people in the ecosystem that would be material to us. Our early customers, we built deep trust with a lot of our early customers and worked hand in hand with them. So regardless of, how I might have given off a first impression as, whatever I was, a 26-year-old shithead, by the time we were really working together, I think the depth of, the rigor with which we thought about the problems that we solved, the standards that we held ourselves to, the amount of work that we did, our knowledge of the ecosystem, I think came out. So that was one. I hope that was one at least. But that took a really, really long time. The other thing is everyone but Laura. And so therefore Laura had to do a lot of things because the rest of us were all focused on what I'm about to say. So Laura had to kind of wear every other hat. But almost everyone who started the company was a technical and product person, not just technical, but a product-minded technical person. And we built really high quality product from day one and shipped really high quality product at a very fast pace from day one. And I think no matter how skeptical folks might have been in early conversations, the pace we were able to operate and help people out, I think eventually garnered us a really, really good reputation. But it took us from 2015 when this woman named Jenny Fielding at Techstars, absolute legend, took a shot on us, brought us into Techstars, moved us from Richmond, Virginia up to New York, which I thought was going to be a 3-month thing. And now I'm on year 9, or I think I'm on year 10. Everything from that moment to some of the early folks who bet on us all the way through, really, I would say 2019. So fully 4 years was just scratching and clawing, nothing easy. We had no more than 10 people, maybe 12 people throughout that entire period. Thought we were going to go out of business a bunch of times. I'm very open that Laura had to talk me out of us going out of business one time because I got so demoralized that we couldn't get I just felt like we were never going to get the banks and fintechs that really mattered over the line. They were never going to trust us with their most sensitive.
So you thought about throwing the towel?
Oh, totally. In 2017, it was funny. And I've really learned, I have this now thing that I say a lot, which is the moment that things are actually pretty far into getting better tends to be the moment people want to give up the most. And the reason for that is if you just think about a curve of I'm so excited, everything's bad. Okay, now things are getting better. The point where things are getting better is very close to the low point on that curve. From a just pure distance, you're only just a little bit above the low point. So you're still in a terrible place. And it's actually been a longer time since you were excited than the low point. The low point, you can still remember when you were excited. When things start to get better, it's been even longer. And that was what was happening to us in 2017. And it's a lesson I talk to myself about a lot. I talk to other people about a lot. Think about whether that could be happening to you. And in this case, we had come 2 years in. We had a couple of customers. We had a few customers. And we were in the middle of selling the customers that were going to really matter and take us to the next level. And I just felt like they were never going to happen. I just felt like it had been so long. I had been pitching the same people for so long. They were so bought in on what we were doing. They couldn't purchase. Like, why is that? What's going on between everyone feeling like we're solving this really material problem, us even having enough customers you could talk to where you can believe it's real, and then like nobody can actually buy the thing. And I was just like, I feel like there's something fundamental I don't understand about this market. What then happened is little by little, and I remember like a couple of weeks after we had that conversation where I was like, I just don't know if this is ever going to happen. One of those deals just sent us the signed paperwork and said, let's get going. I'm like, okay, well, there's one, and then another, and then another. And I'm not saying it was like a deal a week, but it started to kind of happen the way it would then happen for the rest of time up until now, which is like, yeah, people like get interested. It takes some period of time, and you do the right things, you do the right POC, and then they buy the product. But I got super demoralized just in that, like, wow, it seems like people even want to buy the product and they don't even seem like they're able to. It turns out, fast forward, our now our head of global, Edwina, but she was our COO for many years before she just moved back to the UK and opened up our global presence in our UK team, which is super exciting. But when Edwina joined later that year, I mean, I think she thought it was like, I don't know if she thought it was funny, but I think she thought it was obvious that the reason all the things that I was describing of like, well, why can't they buy the product? They're like, Tommy, because we don't have a legal and compliance department to like work through red lines on their contracts. And we make it so hard to procure the thing because we make them do 18 other external things before they can sign our contract. And, it turned out that the answer to why it was so hard to sell was because it's an infrastructure product doing the most sensitive thing ever. And by the way, we didn't really know how to do the commercial side of it. And then once we got good at that stuff, like, it got easier. But yeah, it was super demoralizing. And I have taken that as a lesson of how to identify the wrong type of demoralizing from the right type of demoralizing.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I guess it also goes to show you that your team is important. Who surrounds you is important. What has been your philosophy to grow the team and make sure you're building the right people on board?
Well, so what has been my philosophy, I'm sure I've had a lot of bad philosophies around this. I think two things, I'll see if I can find the words to describe some things I think I've done wrong, but I'm start by doing some things that I think we've done right. I have been bailed out personally of a lot of things that I would have done that would have been bad by the fact that my co-founders and everybody who started the company and the first few people we hired are all high integrity, tier 1 quadruple A smart and kind people. And in fact, Laura and Scott, 2 of the 4 people who are on the founding team and that are still here, are like really like dialed in, kind, like people with like a really kind of front of mind kindness mentality, versus my co-founder Charles and I, who I think Charles is an extremely kind person, and then I'll just withhold my opinion about myself. But him and I are very willing to just like argue each other to death in front of anyone, in front of each other, and then like go out and have a beer afterwards. And so even just among the 4 of us having that sort of balance of those mentalities and being, me being able to lean maybe more into the more like balanced version, more like kind forward version of leadership, that I think Laura and I always credit Scott as being a part of that. Like all the people I think are, like I said, like super smart, super kind, blah, 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 blah. But also the mix of people and then our relationship has helped guide us to having a really good dynamic and a really good outcome. And I think we have demonstrated that to other people consistently and without exception, because that's something that we have at our core. We also trust each other a ton, having all worked together, but also Charles, Scott, and I went to high school together. Sure. They're like best friends in high school. I went to college with Charles. We worked on a startup there. Like, so we also have really kind of, deeper kind of relationship bonds. That backfires for a lot of people, but it's been amazing for us. So that's something that we've done right. And then I would add a lot of the early people who joined our team have those same qualities. Our first engineering hire, Jeff, our COO, Edwina. So we had that at the core. The other thing that I would say is that we've done well. And so why does that matter? Because for whatever reason, the sort of early nucleus and the way people operate, it just replicates itself in so many ways, the good and the bad. It just, you get the bad that you demonstrate to other people as a group, you get the good that you demonstrate from other people as a group. That's who wants to join. That's who you recruit. That it just is the way that it is. So that's been on the balance very, very good. The other thing around team building that we've done, I think particularly well, is we hired a head of people very, very early. And I tell founders this, like, as soon as you're going to be hiring more than 2 people at a time, and really anyone, go try to find a partner who's going to run the people function for at least some period of time. And our head of people has scaled with us from employee 12 to now, and is continuing to fly high. Go find somebody to lead that function that you really trust as an equal partner in the business. Because if you are a people forward person who really likes people, cares about people, et cetera, it just eats up all your energy if you don't have somebody you really trust partnering to not only deal with good things, problems, whatever it is, but also to build the processes that you can feel proud of. And I think we've done that really well. And I was reflecting on this just yesterday. I was reading back on some like scorecards I wrote in leadership hiring a very long time ago. What are some things that we did poorly? I don't think, or what have we gotten better over time? And actually Kim, our head of people, has helped us get better over time. Because you asked me this, having a real philosophy that goes beyond those things I just said about what's going to make a good hire, a good leader, a good individual, a good this, a good that. We have those philosophies now, and I think we have earned them because we have been through so much growth, and we've just had so many opportunities to learn. But, we came in as somewhat inexperienced people having to learn a little bit on the fly. And I think we're saved and have like a great culture and a great team and are known for that to some extent because of those 2 things we got right. We got, I guess said another way, maybe we got almost everything else wrong, and we're saved by the fact that we have an ultra strong head of people and a really strong demonstrable core. And we've figured out everything else as we go.
Tommy, you were just talking about Alloy's struggles and kind of wandering around the desert. There are a number of founders today, when is this? May 2023, that are probably going through similar struggles, right? What's your take on what's happened in the market, where we are, with a lot of companies having serious existential risk, either because they can't raise or their cap table is busted, or a number of many different things.
Okay, so here's what makes this hard, and you and I have talked about this a little bit. But this is what makes this hard. I talk to people all the time, and I hear their situations. So I'm just like, boy, like it's a really tough situation. That's gonna be hard. And then I think about the businesses that I know that didn't just work right away, like Alloy. I mean, Alloy really didn't just work right away. I think we made, I'm going to spare you the numbers, but like the numbers of the acceleration from like 2018 to 2019 to 2020, and this is pre-pandemic, like it's almost like the business didn't exist from 2015 to 2019. We produced so little, right? So like it was a really long time. And yet, like, I think Alloy is now extremely, almost objectively valuable in a lot of really fundamental ways. We have over 400 customers. We have huge number of important banks, huge number of important fintechs. We have better product than we've ever had. We have the best product in the market for the things that we do, in many cases by a ton. And so then I'm hearing, you'll be talking to somebody and they're like, and you really realize they're kind of in a really shitty situation. I'm like, I really want to tell them to give up because it feels like the right advice to give. And then I think back to like, oh boy, like your entire life and like everything that's going to be the most, successful thing you've ever done comes from the fact that you didn't give up. And I've just noodled this a whole bunch. And instead of giving, I think advice is usually a bad thing to give because advice is generic and you really need to get down to the specifics and talk it through. So I'll just say what I'm looking for these days. Yeah. All right. The first thing I'm looking for is I go back to why did Laura and Charles talk me out of? What was the thing that they said to me and said to us? And what were we saying to ourselves that kept us going? And it was that we loved working together. That was one thing. And we really did want to build something together. That's not a great reason, but it is a prerequisite. So it wasn't a slog going to work every day with Laura and Charles and Peter and Jeff and Edwina. It was a joy. So you could tell yourself that story. But the more important fact for why we were going to succeed was we were still dead convinced with no caveats that the problem we were solving, the way we were solving, if we could get past this thing that I was very frustrated with, which was just like we couldn't get the business side of the business moving. was going to be huge, and that it was going to be a big category. And if we didn't do it, somebody else would do it. And nobody else seemed to be doing it. And we had done a pretty good job. And we knew we had built the product to be good. So this chasm of just getting enough customer momentum to get more customer momentum really did feel like the only thing. That felt like the only thing. And it turned out to be dead true that that was the only thing. So if I talk to founders and I feel like they feel like the path to get to some thing is so uncertain, and could be the funding environment, could be whatever it is, and that's what's demoralizing them, I'm like, head down, man, figure it out. Like, just figure it out. Because if you get time matters so much. And if you can get the time and you can keep grinding that out day over day, and then you're the one who's been around it for 5 years, not a year and a half, and you have the trust of the customer, or you just build and build and build, and now your product blows people's minds or whatever. I'm using like things I've been through, but like something about time might really matter to you. If instead, on the other hand, I can tell they're doing it because they feel like they owe it to somebody, then it's like, let me free your mind. You can give the money back. You can give the money back. Like, there's two things people really need to hear. You can give the money back, and you can raise a down round. You can raise a down round if you're in that first camp where it's like, you just need to get over that hump, whatever it is. You can raise a down round. Down rounds are great. We've raised a down round. We raised a down round. We've raised a down round, or like something approximating a down round, at under a $10 million valuation with like almost $1 million in ARR. Like, fintech market used to be different, dude. Yes. I'm just telling you. And this was not that long ago. So, and our most recent round was a $1.5 billion valuation, just for, just like the context there.
You can grow out of 10 million.
You can grow out of it, right? It's like completely possible. You can raise a down round. And the down round, and what cracks me up is a lot of the down rounds that these founders talk about, like, wow, I raised at 100 billion. I raised 100 million. How could I raise at 60 million? I'm like, you can just raise at 60 million. Guess what? You get 20 million on a $60 million valuation. You didn't sell the whole company. Now you have $20 million. Like, $20 million. I can't believe it sometimes. And I think that's the most common dilemma people are in right now, is figuring out which of those they're in. But I think a tell is when the way people describe the entire problem is in relationship to their valuation, their investor expectations, external expectations. And the reason that I lean more into suggesting that people should really think about giving the money back, or giving the money back or shutting down, they may not have money to give back, but if they have money, is because I think over the last, I hope this doesn't sound like get off my lawn-y, but I think it's true. I think over the last like 3 years in particular, people have been encouraged directly to start companies in a way that they never were before. It used to be everyone was trying to talk you out of starting a company. There was a very select number of people in a very select number of physical communities, and then like non-physical communities, like alumni of certain schools, alumni of certain companies, that were outwardly encouraged to start companies. Now it's like, oh, you're a PM at any company that's ever raised money, you should start a company for sure. Like, that was kind of how the like pipeline was generating. And I really think a lot of companies, I talk to founders all the time that I'm like, why are you starting the company? They're like, well, I knew I was going to start a company. So then I did some exercise and then I started the company. I'm like, that's just not a great way to start a company. That's just not, like, you started with the end in mind. And if you've now backed your way into something you're passionate about and you think it's going to work, awesome outcome. But if you haven't, then like it was a fool's errand in the first place, and everyone will be chill if you give the money back. Everyone will be fine if you shut the company down. I've shut a company down. I think I've shut 2 companies down. It's okay. So, that's where my head's at. That's my soapbox.
And by the way, I think we're a little bit back in that moment where not everyone is starting companies. Right? And then the ones that do, they're kind of obsessed about it.
I think one of the things that pissed me off for a long time was when people would complain about how easy it is to raise money. I remember in 2018, people being like, oh, it's so easy for these founders to raise money. I was like, it's impossible for me to raise money. So I don't know who you're talking about, but I'm spending all of my time. I mean, Laura and I, from 2016 to 2017, pitched 100 investors and got 100 no's. Now, we had raised a great seed round from infinitely patient and amazing Primary Ventures and a few other folks here in New York, and Jenny Fielding had put us in Techstars. But we made $1.5 million last like 2.5 years or something. Maybe we raised another $250,000 or something. Oh no, that's definitely true. An angel investor, I just can't remember if she's like public that she did that, but like we had an angel investor write us like a $100,000 check. I think it was a scout check, but I don't even know. I've never even looked into this in like 2017. That actually I think we would have gone out of business if she hadn't written that check. Like that's the level of like needing money that we stopped paying ourselves. We had no savings. So it wasn't like stop paying yourselves and live off savings. It was like stop paying yourselves and like see if your landlord notices you didn't pay rent type situation. Anyway, so people used to say that all the time. And I used to be like, that's so ridiculous. And you talk to founders in almost every geo of almost every background. And they're like, fundraising $250,000 is freaking impossible. What are you people talking about? It's still, that's always been true all the way through the mania of 2021, 2022, 2023. I guess not so much 2023. I will say though, it did get pretty easy for a much larger group of people to raise money. And I think that group of people, it's good that was a different than the previous group of people. And it wasn't just like HBS grads or whatever. But I think it was bad in the sense that it became, I mean, a lot of VCs pitch founders on like starting companies. I think there's a limit to how good that can be. I think there's certain funds that do a really good job of identifying people that should really start companies and partnering with them. But it became like a real like Sequoia, I don't know if they did this, so I'm accusing them of something I don't know the details on. Big funds going just kind of like pool of money. Startup comes out of Robinhood, fund it. Like it's just happening. I think that's been, it may be good for the world. I'm not sure. I think it's been pretty tragic for a lot of those founders. And I'll just end with saying like, the reason you brought this up is because just the way that I know, that this isn't like an esoteric, like niche podcast question. This is something people are really going through. Yeah. We have a lot of founders out there that are going through it, capital G, capital T, capital I. And I hope that they know that the options that they have on the table are open to them. And, there's not only one way out of this.
Tommy, amazing conversation. Thanks again for welcoming me to the Alloy mothership.
Yes.
This is going to be a popular episode, no doubt.
I hope so. And I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a great conversation and look forward to chatting more.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this great episode with Tommy, CEO of Alloy. If you want more interviews, make sure to subscribe, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. It helps and means a lot. And if you have any suggestions or thoughts about the show, just drop me a line on Twitter or LinkedIn. Signing off till next week, I'm your host, Miguel Armaza.